The golden California sun blazed overhead as Marcus Sterling's Aston Martin purred down Rodeo Drive. The 35-year-old tech mogul barely noticed the admiring glances from pedestrians. He was running late for a board meeting, and his mind was consumed with the upcoming presentation that could reshape his company's future. His perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit and carefully styled dark hair reflected in his rearview mirror, reminding him of the image he'd spent years cultivating, the brilliant, ruthless Silicon Valley wunderkind who'd turned a startup into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The wail of a police siren pierced his thoughts. Marcus glanced at his speedometer and cursed under his breath. He'd been distracted, pushing well over the speed limit without realizing it. With a resigned sigh, he pulled over, already reaching for his wallet. He'd dealt with traffic stops before. They were usually quick affairs once the officer recognized his name or saw his address. Through his side mirror, Marcus watched the police officer approach. Something about her walk seemed familiar, confident, yet graceful, with a subtle sway that tickled at the edges of his memory. As she drew closer, he could make out more details. Athletic build, honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun, mirrored aviator sunglasses that caught the morning light. "License and registration, please," she said, her voice professional but with an unmistakable hint of authority that made Marcus's usual arrogance falter for a moment. "Officer, I apologize for the speed, but I'm running late for an important meeting. Perhaps we could—" Marcus began, employing his usual charm. "License and registration," she repeated, cutting him off firmly. Irritation flared in Marcus's chest. He wasn't used to being dismissed so easily. "Do you know who I am?" The words came out before he could stop them, dripping with the entitled attitude he'd developed over years of getting his way. The officer removed her sunglasses, and Marcus's world stopped spinning. Those eyes, those impossible, mesmerizing green eyes that had haunted his dreams for 15 years, stared back at him. The perfectly sculpted features that had matured but lost none of their beauty belonged to Sarah Mitchell, his first and only true love from high school. Recognition flickered across her face, but her professional mask remained firmly in place. "Yes, Mr. Sterling, I know exactly who you are. License and registration, please." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he handed over his documents, his mind racing back to their shared past. Sarah Mitchell, the brilliant scholarship student who'd captured his heart during their senior year at Berkeley Preparatory Academy. The girl who'd disappeared without a trace just days after their graduation, leaving nothing but a brief note, saying she had to leave and asking him not to look for her. Sarah examined his documents with meticulous care, deliberately avoiding his gaze. The tension between them crackled like static electricity before a storm. Marcus noticed small details about her that spoke of the years they'd missed. A tiny scar near her temple that hadn't been there before, the confident set of her shoulders that came from years of authority, the subtle lines around her eyes that hinted at both laughter and hardship. "You're going 15 over the limit in a school zone, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice professionally distant. "I'm issuing you a citation. Please drive more carefully in the future." As she wrote the ticket, Marcus struggled to find words that would break through her professional facade. "Sarah, it's been so long. Can we sign here, please?" she interrupted, holding out the citation. Their fingers brushed briefly as he took the pen, and Marcus felt the same electric shock he'd experienced the first time they'd touched during a shared chemistry lab 15 years ago. "Oh, your court date is listed at the bottom if you wish to contest the citation," Sarah continued, as if she were addressing any other motorist. "Have a safe day, Mr. Sterling." Before Marcus could respond, she turned and walked back to her patrol car, her posture rigid and professional. He watched in the rearview mirror as she pulled away, his mind reeling from the encounter. The board meeting that had seemed so crucial just minutes ago now felt utterly insignificant. As he sat there trying to process what had just happened, his phone buzzed with a text from his personal assistant, Eleanor. "Meeting moved to 11. Also, we need to discuss security arrangements for the upcoming charity gala." Marcus stared, at the message, then back at the citation in his hand. Sarah's badge number was printed clearly at the bottom, 2749. After 15 years of wondering what had happened to her, the universe had literally thrown her back into his path. and something told him this was only the beginning. Elena Martinez sat across from Marcus in his sleek corner office, watching with growing concern as he paced behind his desk. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of San Francisco. But her boss hadn't spared it a single glance all morning. Something about him seemed different, distracted, unsettled, almost vulnerable. In the 5 years she'd worked as his personal assistant, she'd never seen him like this. So, about the security arrangements for the gala, Eleanor began, consulting her tablet. The police department is sending their top officer to coordinate with our private security team. They're particularly concerned about the tech prototype showcase portion of the event. Marcus stopped pacing. Do you have the officer's name? Let me check. Elena scrolled through her documents, then froze. This was the moment she'd both anticipated and dreaded for years. Yes, it's Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. The subtle flinch in Marcus's shoulders confirmed what Elena had suspected since his return from the board meeting. You've already seen her, haven't you? Marcus turned to face her, his expression a mix of surprise and suspicion. How did you... He stopped mid-sentence, studying her face carefully. You knew. You knew she was here in San Francisco. Didn't... You? Elena set down her tablet and took a deep breath. Sarah is my cousin. After she moved here and joined the police force, I deliberately sought out this position with your company. The betrayal that flashed across Marcus's face made her hurry to explain. I've watched you these past 5 years, seen how you throw yourself into work, how you've never had a serious relationship, and I've listened to Sarah talk about her regrets, even though she never mentions you by name. Neither of you has ever moved on, not really. Marcus sank into his chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Why didn't you tell me? It wasn't my story to tell, Elena replied softly. Sarah made me promise not to interfere. She said you deserved to live your life without her complications. But I've seen how successful you've become and how empty that success feels to you. I hoped the gala might be an opportunity for you both to finally talk. Talk? Marcus laughed bitterly. She could barely look at me this morning. She treated me like any other stranger she'd pulled over, because that's who she had to be in that moment. Officer Mitchell doing her job. But the Sarah I know has never forgotten you. She keeps a photo from your graduation day hidden in her desk drawer. I've seen her look at it when she thinks no one's watching. The revelation seemed to strike Marcus like a physical blow. He stood and walked to the windows, staring out at the bay. Why did she leave? One day we were planning our future, and the next... Eleanor hesitated. There were things she knew, pieces of the puzzle she'd gathered over the years, but it wasn't her place to reveal them. I think that's something you need to ask her yourself, and you'll have the chance. She'll be at tomorrow's security briefing. Marcus turned back to his desk and picked up the charity gala portfolio. Tell me everything about the security arrangements. I want to know exactly what her role will be. As Elena began explaining the details, she noticed a subtle change in Marcus's demeanor. The lost look in his eyes was replaced by something more familiar, determination. She recognized it as the same expression he wore when tackling a challenging business problem, and she felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps her long-term plan wasn't so far-fetched after all. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Eleanor could tell Marcus's mind was elsewhere. She watched as he checked his phone more frequently than usual, his fingers hovering over the keys as if composing messages he'd never send. Occasionally, he'd pull out the traffic citation and study it, as though the paper might reveal some hidden secret about its issuer. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the office, Eleanor gathered her things to leave. At the door, she paused. Marcus, there's something else you should know. The reason Sarah's been chosen for the gala security detail, she's not just any police officer. She's being considered for Chief of Special Operations. This event, if it goes well, could cement her promotion. Marcus nodded slowly, processing this new information. She always did aim high, he murmured, more to himself than to Eleanor. Even in school, she never settled for second best. Just like someone else I know. Eleanor replied with a knowing smile. "The briefing's at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. She hates tardiness." As she walked to the elevator, Elena sent a quick text to her cousin. "Everything's in motion. Don't run this time, Sarah. Some things are worth fighting for." The Sterling Tech conference room buzzed with tension as Sarah Mitchell stood at the head of the table, her police uniform crisp and authoritative. The morning sun streaming through the windows caught the lieutenant's bars on her collar, sending tiny reflections dancing across the white walls. She was in her element, commanding the attention of both the corporate security team and her own officers as she detailed the security protocols for the upcoming charity gala. Marcus sat at the opposite end of the table, ostensibly reviewing the security briefing documents, but his eyes kept drifting to Sarah. She was different in daylight, away from the charged atmosphere of yesterday's traffic stop. Her movements were precise and confident, her voice clear and professional as she pointed out potential security risks on the venue's blueprints. "The prototype showcase is our primary concern," Sarah explained, highlighting different sections of the digital display. "We'll have millions of dollars worth of unreleased technology in one room, along with some of the most influential people in the tech industry. Our security needs to be seamless, but unobtrusive." Elena, sitting beside Marcus, subtly nudged him as Sarah walked around the table, approaching their end to distribute detailed security schedules. The faint scent of her perfume, still the same jasmine she'd worn in high school, made Marcus's chest tighten with memories. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah addressed him directly for the first time, her professional mask firmly in place. "We'll need you to adjust your presentation schedule. The original timing creates a blind spot in our security rotation." Their eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, her composure wavered. Marcus saw a flicker of the girl who used to laugh at his terrible physics jokes, who'd spend hours with him in the school library discussing their dreams for the future. But just as quickly, the moment passed and Lieutenant Mitchell was back. "Of course, Lieutenant," Marcus replied, matching her professional tone. "Elena can help coordinate any necessary changes." The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The other attendees seemed to sense the undercurrent of tension between the CEO and the police lieutenant, though none could guess at its true nature. As Sarah concluded the briefing, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't let her walk away again, without answers. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he called out as the room began to empty, "a word about the VIP security protocols?" Sarah's hesitation was barely noticeable before she nodded, gathering her materials with deliberate slowness as the last of the attendees filed out. Eleanor lingered by the door until Sarah gave her a slight nod, then closed it behind her, leaving them alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 15 years of unspoken words. Sarah moved to the window, her back straight, her reflection overlaying the city skyline beyond the glass. "You look good, Sarah," Marcus finally said, his voice softer than he'd intended. "The uniform suits you." "Don't," she replied, still facing the window. "Please don't make this personal." "Personal?" Marcus stepped closer, careful to maintain a professional distance. "You disappeared without a trace 15 years ago. No explanation, no goodbye. Just a note asking me not to look for you. And now you're here in my company planning security for my event. How is this not personal?" Sarah turned to face him, her professional mask cracking slightly. "I had my reasons." "And I deserved to know them," Marcus countered, years of hurt bleeding into his voice. "We were going to travel through Europe. That summer, remember? We had plans, dreams. I waited at the airport for hours, calling your phone over and over until I finally went to your house and found it empty." "Life doesn't always go according to plan," Sarah said, but her voice had lost some of its authority. "Sometimes we have to make hard choices. Was it really your choice?" Marcus asked, watching her carefully. "Or did someone make it for you?" Sarah's slight flinch told him he'd struck a nerve. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, her composure visibly shaken. "I have another meeting. The security plans. Need your approval by tomorrow morning." As she reached for the door handle, Marcus spoke again. "I looked for you, for months, called every police academy in the country. Hired private investigators. It was like you'd vanished into thin air. Sarah paused, her hand on the door. I know, she said quietly. Elena told me. That's partly why I asked her not to tell you when she started working here. You'd built this amazing company, created this incredible life. You didn't need ghosts from the past complicating things. Shouldn't that have been my choice to make? She turned back slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of moisture in her eyes before she blinked it away. Some choices are made for us, Marcus, no matter how much we wish they weren't. With that, she opened the door and strode out, her boots clicking against the polished floor with military precision. Marcus watched her go, his mind racing. Something about her last words, combined with Elena's careful hints, was starting to form a pattern. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Dad, we need to talk about Sarah Mitchell. Richard Sterling's private study hadn't changed in 15 years. The same leather-bound books lined the walls, the same antique globe stood in the corner, and the same imposing mahogany desk dominated the room. Marcus sat across from his father, studying the face of the man who had shaped so much of his life, for better and worse. Sarah Mitchell, Richard repeated, swirling the scotch in his crystal tumbler. I wondered if this day would come. He looked older than Marcus remembered, the silver in his hair now outweighing the black, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. Did you have something to do with her disappearance? Marcus asked directly, watching his father's reaction. Carefully, Richard set down his glass with deliberate precision. I did what I thought was best for your future. The Sterlings have a legacy to uphold. You were brilliant, destined for greatness, but you were also young and impulsive. Sarah, she was a distraction. The confirmation hit Marcus like a physical blow, even though he'd suspected it. What did you do? I made some calls, Richard admitted, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding his son's gaze. Sarah was exceptional, top of her class, natural leader, ambitious. It wasn't hard to arrange a full scholarship to the FBI Academy with a guaranteed fast-track position afterward. The catch was that she had to leave immediately, with no contact with anyone from her past life. Marcus stood abruptly, his hands clenching into fists. You had no right. I had every right, Richard interrupted, a flash of the old steel in his voice. I was protecting you, protecting our family's future. Look at what you've accomplished without her holding you back. Sterling Tech is one of the most innovative companies in the world. You're a billionaire before 40. Holding me back? Marcus laughed bitterly. Sarah was the one who encouraged me to pursue technology instead of following your footsteps into investment banking. She believed in my ideas when everyone else thought they were pipe dreams. She wasn't a distraction. She was my inspiration. Richard stood and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. She was a scholarship student from a middle-class family. She wouldn't have understood our world, the responsibilities that come with our position in society. No, Marcus said quietly, a sudden clarity washing over him. You were the one who didn't understand. Sarah knew exactly who she was and what she wanted from life. That's what scared you, wasn't it? She couldn't be controlled or bought off. His father turned, surprise flickering across his features. The scholarship was a generous offer. It was a cage disguised as an opportunity, Marcus interrupted. And knowing Sarah, she probably figured that out too late after she'd already committed to it. What did you do? Threaten to revoke it if she contacted me? Make her sign some sort of non-disclosure agreement? The slight shift in Richard's expression told Marcus he'd hit the mark. The agreement was for her own protection. A clean break was better than what? Than letting your son make his own choices? Than risking your precious social status by having him marry someone who wasn't from the right background? You were 19. Richard's composure finally cracked. You were talking about marriage, about throwing away your future on some teenage romance. Marcus stepped closer to his father, his voice low and intense. I was talking about building a future with someone who saw me for who I was, not for my last name or my trust fund. And now I find out that all these years, all that pain and confusion, was because you decided to play God with our lives. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. You know what the irony is, Dad? Sarah became exactly the kind of person you always wanted me to marry. Successful, respected, a leader in her field. But instead of letting us find our way there, together you forced us apart and caused 15 years of unnecessary pain. Marcus, Richard called out, something like regret in his voice. I truly thought I was doing what was best for you. No, Marcus replied without turning around. You did what was best for you, for your vision of what our family should be. But things are different now. I'm not that 19-year-old kid anymore, and you're not the all-powerful father who gets to dictate my life. As he walked out of his childhood home, Marcus pulled out his phone and called Elena. I need everything you can tell me about that security agreement Sarah signed, and I mean everything. Already on it, Elena replied. But Marcus, there's something else you should know. Sarah's not just consulting on the gala security. She's been investigating potential corporate espionage within Sterling Tech. Someone's been trying to steal the prototype that's being unveiled at the gala. Marcus stopped in his tracks, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. Sarah's assignment to the gala wasn't just a coincidence or a twist of fate. It was deliberate. She'd chosen to protect his company, despite everything that had happened between them. The question was why? Sarah sat in her dimly lit office at the police station, surveillance photos spread across her desk. The images showed various Sterling Tech employees entering and leaving the building at odd hours, but one face kept appearing with suspicious regularity. James Morrison, the company's head of research and development. Her instincts told her something was off about his behavior patterns. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor stepped in, carrying 2 cups of coffee from their favorite local cafe. Thought you might need this, she said, placing 1 cup on Sarah's desk. You've been staring at those photos for hours. Thanks, Sarah replied, taking a grateful sip. Have you noticed anything unusual about Morrison's behavior at work? Eleanor perched on the edge of the desk, carefully, avoiding the scattered photos. He's been spending a lot of time in the secure labs after hours. Claims he's fine-tuning the prototype for the gala presentation, but... She hesitated. But what? The demo unit isn't kept in those labs. It's in a separate facility across town. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing this information. Does Marcus know about Morrison's after-hours activities? Marcus has been distracted since your traffic stop, Elena said carefully. And even more so since his conversation with his father yesterday. Sarah's hand tightened around her coffee cup. He knows, doesn't he? About the scholarship, the agreement. He knows his father was involved, but he doesn't know the whole story, does he? Eleanor's gentle probe hung in the air between them. Sarah stood and walked to her office window, watching the fog roll in from the bay. I was so angry when I figured out Richard Sterling's manipulation, but by then I was already committed to the program. The agreement wasn't just about staying away from Marcus. It was about protecting Sterling Industries' interests. Richard made sure I understood that breaking it would mean more than just losing my scholarship. What do you mean? He had dirt on my father, Sarah admitted quietly. Nothing illegal, but enough professional embarrassment to end his teaching career. Classic Richard Sterling, always having leverage. She turned back to Elena. That's why I took this case. When I saw the signs of potential corporate espionage at Sterling Tech, I knew I had to be the one to handle it. I owe it to Marcus to protect what he's built, even if he never knows why. Eleanor stepped closer, putting a hand on her cousin's shoulder. He deserves to know the whole truth, Sarah, about everything, including the real reason I never contacted him after the scholarship ended. Sarah shook her head. Some truths are better left buried. A notification pinged on Sarah's computer, drawing both women's attention. Security footage from Sterling Tech's parking garage appeared on the screen, showing Morrison entering the building at 11:47 p.m. He's there again, Sarah said, professional focus returning to her voice. And the gala's tomorrow night. She grabbed her jacket from the back of her chair. I need to check this out. Sarah, wait, Elena called as she reached the door. Marcus is working late tonight too. If you go there now, then I'll deal with it professionally like everything else. But Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she checked her service weapon. The security of his company has to come first. Personal feelings can't interfere with that. As she drove through the foggy San Francisco streets towards Sterling Tech, Sarah's mind wandered back to the last time she'd seen Richard Sterling before today. It was the day after graduation, in his study, as he laid out her choices with cold precision. The scholarship papers on one side of his desk, the file about her father on the other. She'd been so young, so unprepared for that level of manipulation. The Sterling Tech building loomed ahead, its upper floors disappearing into the fog. Sarah parked in an unmarked spot and entered through a side door using the security credentials she'd been given for the gala preparation. The late-night cleaning crew barely glanced at her police uniform as she made her way to the secure lab level. As the elevator climbed, Sarah checked her phone. A text from Elena glowed on the screen. "Marcus is in his office on 47, Morrison's on 32, be careful." Sarah stepped out onto the 32nd floor, her footsteps silent on the carpeted hallway. Light spilled from under the secure lab's door. Morrison was definitely inside. She reached for the handle, then froze at the sound of familiar voices approaching. From around the corner. "I don't care what it takes, we need that security report tonight." Marcus's voice carried clearly through the quiet hallway. "After what my father revealed, I need to know exactly what's been happening in my company." Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. In all her scenarios for investigating Morrison, she hadn't planned on Marcus being on this floor. But before she could retreat, footsteps rounded the corner and suddenly she was face to face with both Marcus Sterling and the man she suspected of trying to steal his company's secrets. The moment stretched like pulled glass, fragile and sharp. Morrison recovered first, his practiced smile sliding into place. "Lieutenant Mitchell, what brings you to our secure floor at this hour?" Sarah's training kicked in, her professional mask falling seamlessly into place despite her racing heart. "Final security sweep for tomorrow's gala, Mr. Morrison. We're checking all access points on the secure floors." Marcus's eyes hadn't left her face, his expression a complex mixture of surprise, suspicion, and something deeper she couldn't quite read. "At midnight, Lieutenant. Security threats don't keep regular business hours, Mr. Sterling," she replied, matching his formal tone. But her mind was racing. Why was Marcus meeting Morrison so late? Had Elena's text about Marcus being on the 47th floor been intentionally misleading? Morrison shifted subtly, his hand tightening on his leather briefcase. "Well, I was just leaving, Mr. Sterling and I have finished our discussion about tomorrow's presentation." "Actually," Marcus interjected, his voice taking on the sharp edge Sarah remembered from their school debates, "we haven't finished discussing the irregularities in your lab access logs. Lieutenant Mitchell might be interested in those as well." The atmosphere in the hallway changed instantly. Morrison's smile became fixed, his knuckles white against the briefcase handle. Sarah's police instincts screamed danger just as Morrison shoved past her, sprinting toward the emergency stairs. Without hesitation, Sarah took off after him, her athletic build and police training giving her the advantage in the pursuit. She could hear Marcus's footsteps behind her as they descended the stairwell, Morrison's panicked breathing echoing off the concrete walls. "Stop! Police!" Sarah's command rang through the stairwell, but Morrison kept running, fumbling with his briefcase as he descended. They burst into the parking garage, the fluorescent lights harsh after the dim stairwell. Morrison stumbled, papers spilling from his partially opened briefcase, technical drawings, prototype specifications, and what looked like correspondence with Sterling Tech's main competitor. Sarah reached him first, her police training taking over as she secured his arms behind his back. Marcus arrived seconds later, breathing heavily, his perfect suit disheveled from the chase. "James Morrison," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing pulse, "you're under arrest for attempted corporate espionage and theft of proprietary information." As she recited his rights, Sarah was acutely aware of Marcus kneeling to gather the scattered documents, his expression darkening as he read their contents. Morrison had gone quiet, the fight draining out of him as the reality of his situation set in. "I'll need to call this in," Sarah said, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Mr. Sterling, we'll need a full statement from you about the lab access. Irregularities you mentioned." Marcus stood, the documents clutched in his hands. "Of course, Lieutenant, though I'm curious, how long have you been investigating this?" Before Sarah could respond, the garage filled with the sound of approaching sirens. Eleanor must have called for backup when she realized what was happening. Within minutes, the parking garage was swarming with officers, and Morrison was being led away to a patrol car. In the chaos of evidence collection and preliminary statements, Sarah found herself alone with Marcus near his car. The professional distance she'd maintained all night threatened to crumble under the weight of his steady gaze. "You knew," he said quietly. "That's why you took the gala security assignment. You were already investigating Morrison." Sarah nodded, too exhausted to maintain pretenses. "I've been tracking suspicious activities at Sterling Tech for weeks. When I realized what was happening, I couldn't let someone destroy what you've built." "Even after everything? After what my father did?" "Your father's actions were his own," Sarah replied, finally meeting his eyes. "What you've accomplished with Sterling Tech, that's all you, Marcus. The brilliant, driven person I knew you could become. I couldn't let someone take that away from you regardless of our past." Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to ensure their privacy. "And what about our future, Sarah? Are you going to disappear again once this case is closed?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "Marcus, Lieutenant Mitchell," an officer called from across the garage. "We need you to sign off on the evidence log." Sarah started to turn away, but Marcus caught her arm gently. "The gala is still happening tomorrow night. Morrison's arrest doesn't change that. Will I see you there?" The warmth of his hand through her uniform sleeve sent shivers down her spine, awakening memories she'd tried so hard to bury. "I'm still in charge of security, Mr. Sterling. It's my job to be there." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." Sarah finally allowed herself to really look at him, at the man he'd become, successful but still carrying the same passionate intensity she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "The gala ends at midnight," she found herself saying. "Meet me at our old spot in Golden Gate Park. There are things you need to know. About everything." As she walked away to deal with the evidence documentation, Sarah could feel Marcus's eyes following her. Tomorrow night would change everything, again. The question was whether they were ready for what those changes might bring. The San Francisco Museum of Modern Art had been transformed for the Sterling Tech Charity Gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the modern architecture, while elaborate floral arrangements softened the stark lines of the gallery spaces. The city's elite moved through the crowds in designer evening wear, their conversations a steady hum beneath the classical quartet's performance. Sarah stood at her command post near the main entrance, looking more elegant than any security chief had a right to in her formal dress uniform. Her eyes constantly scanned the room, checking on her officers stationed at strategic points throughout the venue. But her practiced surveillance faltered every time she caught a glimpse of Marcus in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. He moved through, the crowd with practiced ease, charming potential investors, and graciously accepting congratulations on Morrison's arrest. The news had broken that morning, with Sterling Tech being praised for its cooperation with law enforcement in uncovering corporate espionage. The company's stock had actually risen, public confidence bolstered by their swift handling of the situation. "Everything secure?" Eleanor appeared at Sarah's side, stunning in a deep blue gown that marked her as part of the Sterling Tech executive team rather than just an assistant. "As it can be," Sarah replied, touching her earpiece to acknowledge, a routine check-in from her team. No signs of any other security concerns. Morrison was working alone. "That's not what I meant." Eleanor's knowing look made Sarah shift uncomfortably. "Are you really going to meet him after this?" Sarah watched as Marcus guided an elderly board member to a seat, his genuine kindness showing through his polished exterior. "He deserves to know the truth, all of it, including why you never contacted him after the scholarship ended, why you stayed away even after Richard's leverage expired." Before Sarah could respond, a ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. It was time for Marcus's keynote speech and the unveiling of Sterling Tech's latest innovation. Sarah moved closer to the stage, positioning herself where she could watch both Marcus and the crowd. Marcus stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Sterling Tech was founded on a simple principle. Innovation should serve humanity, not the other way around." His eyes found Sarah's in the crowd as he continued. Sometimes we lose sight of that principle. We get caught up in profits, in prestige, in other people's expectations of what we should be. A murmur went through the audience. This wasn't the usual corporate speech they'd expected. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as Marcus went off script. Yesterday, we caught someone trying to steal our latest innovation, but what struck me most wasn't the attempted theft. It was why it was prevented. It was prevented because someone believed in protecting not just our technology, but what it represents. Someone who has always seen the true potential in things and in people. The crowd shifted, following Marcus's gaze to where Sarah stood. She forced herself to maintain her professional composure, even as her pulse raced at the public acknowledgement. So tonight, before we unveil our latest breakthrough, I want to announce something else. Sterling Tech is establishing a new scholarship foundation. The Future Leaders in Law Enforcement program will provide full rides to police academies across the country, with guaranteed internships in our corporate security division. Because innovation isn't just about technology, it's about the people who protect it, who believe in it, who help it serve its true purpose. Applause erupted, but Sarah barely heard it. She was transported back 15 years to a conversation in the school library where she'd first told Marcus about her dream of going into law enforcement. He'd not only supported her, but had spent hours helping her research the best academies. Now he was making that dream possible for others. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of protocol and procedure. Sarah maintained her professional distance, but she could feel the weight of Marcus's announcement settling around her shoulders. He hadn't just acknowledged her role in stopping Morrison, he'd turned her forced departure into an opportunity for others. As the gala wound down, Sarah received the all-clear from her teams. The event had gone perfectly, with no security incidents. She watched as the last guests departed, leaving only the cleanup crew and a few lingering staff members. Lieutenant Mitchell, a young officer, approached. "We're ready for the final sweep." Sarah nodded, checking her watch. 11:45. In 15 minutes, she was supposed to meet Marcus at their old spot in the park, the bench near the Japanese tea garden, where they'd spent countless hours planning their future. "Go ahead with the sweep," she instructed. "I'll finish up here." As the officer left, Sarah found herself alone in the now quiet museum. Her reflection in the massive windows showed a woman who looked confident, successful, everything she'd wanted to be. But her hand trembled slightly as she reached into her uniform pocket and touched the worn photograph she always carried. Two teenagers on graduation day, their whole lives ahead of them, unaware of how quickly everything would change. "Ready?" Eleanor's voice made her turn. Her cousin held out a small duffel bag. "Your civilian clothes you can change in the security office." Sarah took the bag, grateful for Elena's thoughtfulness. "I don't know if I can do this." "Yes, you can," Eleanor said firmly. "He needs to know why you stayed away, and you need to stop punishing yourself for a choice you were forced to make." As Sarah headed to change, she caught a glimpse of Marcus, directing the cleanup crew, still commanding but with a gentleness she remembered from their youth. In 15 minutes, she would either lose him forever or finally have the chance to explain everything, including the secret she'd carried for 15 years, the real reason she'd never reached out even after his father's leverage had expired. The fog had rolled in thick over Golden Gate Park, wrapping the Japanese tea garden in an ethereal blanket that muffled the distant city sounds. Sarah walked the familiar path, now dressed in jeans and a soft sweater, her uniform carefully packed away in Elena's duffel bag. The wooden bench near the koi pond emerged from the mist, and her steps faltered when she saw Marcus already waiting. There. He'd changed too, trading his tuxedo for casual clothes that reminded her more of the boy she'd known than the corporate titan he'd become. He stood as she approached, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other across 15 years of distance. "You came," he said softly, breaking the silence. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "Honestly, I wasn't sure. You're very good at disappearing." Sarah winced at the gentle accusation in his voice. "That's fair. But I'm here now, and you deserve to know everything." She sat on the bench, and after a moment's hesitation, Marcus joined her, leaving careful space between them. "My father told me about the scholarship, about the agreement he forced you to sign," Marcus began. "But there's more, isn't there?" Elena hinted at it, and I saw it in your eyes at the gala tonight. What aren't you telling me, Sarah?" Sarah took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The scholarship wasn't just about separating us. Your father, he had information about my dad, about some mistakes he'd made early in his teaching career. Nothing illegal, but enough to end his career if it came out. The agreement wasn't just about staying away from you, it was about protecting my family." Marcus's jaw tightened. Classic manipulation. "But that agreement would have expired when you finished the academy. Why didn't you contact me then?" This was the moment Sarah had dreaded for 15 years. She pulled something from her pocket, a worn envelope, creased from years of being carried, unopened. "Because of this, I wrote it the day after I left, but I never sent it. I couldn't." Marcus took the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing his own name written in Sarah's younger handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink slightly faded but still legible. His eyes widened as he read, and Sarah watched the color drain from his face. "Sarah," he whispered, looking up from the letter, was this true?" She nodded, tears finally breaking free. "I found out the morning I was supposed to leave for the academy. I was going to tell you at the airport, but then your father called me to his office. When he showed me the file about my dad, I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't let my father lose everything, but I also couldn't tell you about the baby. Your father made it very clear that if I did, the scholarship would disappear. The file about my dad would go public, and you would have given up everything to support us. I couldn't let you sacrifice your dreams. So you sacrificed everything instead." Marcus's voice cracked. "Sarah, what happened?" "I lost the baby 2 months into the academy," she said, quietly. "The stress, the physical training, my body couldn't handle it. By then the agreement was signed, my dad's career was safe, and you were starting to build Sterling Tech. I saw your first success announcement in the paper. You were following your dreams, changing the world with your innovations. I convinced myself that staying away was the right thing to do." Marcus stood, abruptly, pacing in front of the bench. "You went through all of that alone because my father threatened your family? Because you thought you were protecting my dreams?" He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "Sarah, you were my dream. Everything else, the company, the success, it was all just a way to prove I could make it on my own, to show my father he was wrong about us." "I know that now," Sarah admitted. "Watching you tonight, seeing how you turned even this situation into something positive with that scholarship foundation, you're still the same person who used to spend hours helping me study for tests, who saw the best in everyone. I didn't know how to come back after keeping such a huge secret for so long." Marcus knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me. What my father did to you, to us, was unforgivable, but we're not those teenagers anymore. We've both built lives we can be proud of. The question is, what do we do now?" Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the same warmth and understanding that had first drawn her to him in high school. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "My career is here now, and I'm up for promotion to Chief of Special Operations. And you're running a global technology company. Both in San Francisco," Marcus pointed out, a hint of his old smile returning. "Both dedicated to making the world better in our own ways. Maybe we could try again. Not picking up where we left off. Too much has happened for that. But starting fresh, as the people we are now." The fog swirled around them as Sarah considered his words. The weight of 15 years of secrets felt lighter somehow, shared between them. "I'd like that," she finally said, "but slowly. There's still so much we need to talk about." "We have time," Marcus assured her, squeezing her hands gently. "And this time no one gets to make our choices for us." A soft chime from the Japanese tea garden's clock marked the hour as they sat together on their old bench, the fog wrapping around them like a protective cocoon. They had a long way to go, many conversations to have, and trust to rebuild. But for the first time in 15 years, both Sarah and Marcus felt something they'd almost forgotten: hope. The following weeks brought subtle changes to both Sarah and Marcus's lives. Their reunion became the subject of careful speculation in San Francisco's social circles, especially after they were spotted having coffee together at a small cafe near the police station. But neither of them paid much attention to the whispers. They were too focused on rebuilding something that had been broken 15 years ago. Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing the final report on the Morrison case. Her promotion to Chief of Special Operations had been officially announced that morning, and congratulatory messages filled her inbox. But her attention kept drifting to the small potted jasmine plant that had appeared on her desk earlier. A gift from Marcus with a simple note, "Some things never change." A knock on her door frame made her look up. Elena stood there, grinning. "So, Chief Mitchell, ready for your celebration dinner tonight?" "I still can't believe you arranged a private dinner at the California Academy of Sciences," Sarah said, closing the case file. "That's impossible to book on short notice." Eleanor's grin widened. "I might have had some help. Marcus sits on their board of trustees, remember?" Sarah shook her head, smiling. "Of course he does. You two are impossible, you know that." "We prefer to think of ourselves as facilitators of destiny," Eleanor replied, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk. "Speaking of which, how are things going with you two?" Sarah touched the jasmine plant gently, considering her answer. "It's different than I expected. Better, maybe. We're taking things slowly, really talking this time about everything." "Including Richard?" "Marcus hasn't spoken to his father since the night of the gala," Sarah admitted. "He's angry, not just about what happened 15 years ago, but about the baby. He feels like he should have been there, should have known something was wrong when I disappeared." Elena leaned forward. "And how do you feel about it all?" "Lighter," Sarah said after a moment. "Carrying that secret for so long. I didn't realize how much it weighed on me until I finally told him. And Marcus..." She paused, emotion creeping into her voice. "He's been so understanding. He hasn't pressed for details I'm not ready to share, hasn't tried to rush anything. He's just there." A notification popped up on Sarah's computer screen. A calendar reminder for her morning meeting with Sterling Tech's new security team. After Morrison's arrest, Marcus had completely overhauled the company's internal security protocols, creating a partnership with the police department that was becoming a model for other tech companies. "Speaking of being there," Elena said, nodding at the reminder, "how's it going working together professionally?" Sarah smiled, remembering their most recent security briefing. Marcus had maintained perfect professional decorum during the meeting, but afterward, he'd left a cup of her favorite coffee on her car seat, just like he used to leave notes in her locker during high school. "It's actually working better than I expected. We both understand the importance of keeping personal and professional separate, although..." She hesitated, then continued. "Sometimes I catch him looking at me during meetings, and it's like we're back in that high school chemistry lab, trying to pretend we weren't stealing glances at each other." "You know," Eleanor said thoughtfully, "I always wondered why you took that advanced chemistry class. You hated science." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing through her new office. "Marcus was my lab partner. He tutored me every Sunday at the library. I think I learned more about him than about chemistry that semester." Their conversation was interrupted by another knock. A young officer stood in the doorway, looking slightly nervous. "Chief Mitchell, Mr. Sterling is here to review the new security protocols." Sarah straightened in her chair, smoothing her uniform jacket automatically. "Send him in, Officer Chen." Marcus entered, dressed in a casual blazer and jeans rather than his usual business suit. He carried a leather portfolio and a familiar paper bag from their favorite cafe. "Chief Mitchell," he greeted her formally, but his eyes danced with private amusement. "Ms. Martinez, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Elena said, standing with a knowing smile. "I was just leaving. Don't forget, Sarah, dinner at 7. And Marcus, remember what we discussed about the surprise." After Elena left, closing the door behind her, Marcus set the portfolio on Sarah's desk and held up the paper bag. "I thought we might need sustenance for this security review. Your favorite, almond croissant, still warm from the oven. You..." Remembered, Sarah said softly, accepting the bag. I remember everything, Marcus replied, his voice equally quiet, including how you always got powdered sugar on your nose when you ate these. Their eyes met over the desk, and for a moment the years between them seemed to dissolve. Then Sarah cleared her throat, pulling out the croissant and carefully breaking it in half. We should review those protocols. We should, Marcus agreed, taking the offered half of the pastry. But first, I wanted to ask you something. The Academy of Sciences. They're hosting a new exhibition next month about women pioneers in science and law enforcement. Would you consider being one of their guest speakers? You could talk about your work in modernizing police technology and corporate security partnerships. Sarah blinked in surprise. Me? But I'm not. You're about to become the youngest chief of special operations in San Francisco history, Marcus interrupted gently. You've revolutionized how tech companies and law enforcement work together. And more importantly, you've never let anyone else define what you could achieve. He paused, then added softly, That's one of the things I always loved about you. The use of the past tense wasn't lost on Sarah, nor was the hint of uncertainty in his voice. They were both still navigating this new territory, trying to balance their history with their present. But as she looked at him sitting across from her desk, offering both professional opportunity and personal understanding, Sarah felt something settle in her heart. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. Name it. Have dinner with me afterward, not as the CEO of Sterling Tech and the Chief of Special Operations, just as us. Marcus's smile, the real one, not his professional mask, lit up his face. I think we can arrange that, Chief Mitchell. As they turned to the security protocols, both pretending not to notice when their hands brushed over the shared croissant, Sarah realized that maybe some things didn't need to be rebuilt from scratch. Maybe they just needed to be remembered, and then gently renewed, like the delicate scent of jasmine blooming on her desk. The California Academy of Sciences sparkled under the evening stars, visible through its living roof. Sarah stood at the podium, finishing her presentation about the future of law enforcement and technology cooperation. The audience, a mix of tech industry leaders, law enforcement officials, and aspiring young professionals, hung on her every word. The future of public safety lies not in walls between sectors, but in bridges, she concluded, her confidence evident in every word. When we combine the innovation of the private sector with the dedication of law enforcement, we create something greater than the sum of its parts. Thank you. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. As Sarah stepped down from the stage, she caught sight of Marcus in the back of the room, standing beside Elena. His pride was evident in his expression, but there was something else there, too, a hint of nervousness that seemed out of place on the usually confident CEO. The reception afterward was a blur of handshakes and conversations. Young female officers sought Sarah out for advice. Tech executives wanted to discuss security partnerships, and throughout it all, Sarah maintained the perfect balance of professional authority and approachable warmth that had become her trademark. Chief Mitchell? A familiar voice made her turn. Richard Sterling stood there looking older and more subdued than she remembered. Sarah's protective instincts kicked in immediately. Mr. Sterling, I wasn't aware you were attending tonight. I wasn't planning to, he admitted, but I needed to see you, both of you. He glanced meaningfully across the room where Marcus was deep in conversation with some investors. I have something to say, and I'd rather do it privately. Sarah studied him carefully, years of police training helping her read his body language. There was none of the old arrogance, none of the manipulation. Instead, she saw something she'd never expected, genuine regret. I'll get Marcus, she said finally. Meet us in the planetarium in 5 minutes. It's closed to guests right now. The planetarium was dark and peaceful, the artificial stars twinkling overhead as Sarah and Marcus sat beside each other on one of the curved benches. Richard stood before them, his usual commanding presence diminished by the weight of his purpose. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Richard began, his voice echoing slightly in the domed space. Watching you two these past few weeks, seeing how you've both grown into such remarkable people. It's made me realize the magnitude of what I stole from you, 15 years ago. Marcus tensed beside Sarah, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm, encouraging Richard to continue. "What I did was unforgivable," Richard continued. "I used my power and influence to manipulate two young people who had done nothing wrong, except fall in love across social boundaries that only existed in my own prejudiced mind. And Sarah," his voice cracked slightly, "when I learned about the baby, about what you went through alone, I've never felt more ashamed." "How did you find out?" Sarah asked quietly. "Eleanor told me after the gala. She thought I needed to understand the full impact of my actions." Richard pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is my resignation from the Sterling Tech Board. Marcus, the company is yours completely now. I won't interfere with your decisions ever again, personal or professional." Marcus stared at the envelope, emotions warring on his face. "Dad, I'm not asking for forgiveness," Richard interrupted. "I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance to try to make amends in whatever way you'll allow." He turned to Sarah. "Starting with this." He handed her another envelope. Inside was a legal document dissolving the old non-disclosure agreement, along with a public statement taking full responsibility for his past actions and praising both Sarah's law enforcement career and her role in protecting Sterling Tech. "The press release goes out tomorrow," Richard said. "The world should know that you succeeded not because of my interference, but in spite of it." Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing her own tumult of emotions reflected in his eyes. 15 years of pain and secrets hung in the balance of this moment. "I can't forget what happened," Marcus finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "But maybe we can build something new. All of us." Richard's relief was palpable. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." He turned to leave, then paused. "Sarah, that thing you said in your speech about bridges being stronger than walls, I'm finally beginning to understand what that means." After he left, Sarah and Marcus sat in silence under the artificial stars. Their hands found each other in the darkness, fingers intertwining naturally. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked softly. Marcus squeezed her hand. "I think so. It's strange. I've been so angry for so long, but now it feels like another wall coming down." "We've had enough walls," Sarah agreed. "Maybe it's time to focus on those bridges." Marcus turned to face her in the starlight. "Speaking of bridges, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. The Academy is planning an international technology and law enforcement conference next year. They want Sterling Tech to be a major sponsor, and they're hoping the new Chief of Special Operations might consider being the keynote speaker." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a commitment for both of us." "It is," Marcus agreed, "but I thought maybe we could plan it together, over dinner, maybe lots of dinners." Sarah laughed softly, the sound echoing up to the artificial stars. "Are you asking me out, Mr. Sterling?" "I believe I am, Chief Mitchell." His smile was visible even in the dim light. "What do you say?" Instead of answering, Sarah leaned in and kissed him softly. It was their first kiss in 15 years, but it felt like coming home. When they finally parted, both were smiling. "I'll take that as a yes," Marcus whispered. Above them, the planetarium stars continued their eternal dance, witnesses to a love that had endured separation, secrets and pain, only to emerge stronger, like a bridge built to withstand any storm. 1 year later, Sarah stood in her office at the police headquarters, gazing out at the San Francisco skyline. The morning sun glinted off the Sterling Tech building in the distance, a sight that now brought a smile to her face rather than a pang of regret. Her new office, larger and with an even better view, reflected her recent success as Chief of Special Operations. On her desk, beside the ever-present jasmine plant, which had grown considerably over the past year, sat a framed magazine cover. Forbes had named her one of their 40 under 40 for her revolutionary work in bridging the gap between law enforcement and the tech industry. The article highlighted the innovative security protocols she'd developed with Sterling Tech, now being adopted by police departments and corporations nationwide. A knock at her door interrupted her reflection. Elena entered carrying a garment bag and wearing an expression that mixed excitement with nostalgia. "Is it time already?" Sarah asked, glancing at her watch. Almost. The press conference starts in 2 hours, but knowing you, you'll want to review your speech again at least 3 times before then. Elena hung the garment bag on the coat rack. I still can't believe you're really doing this. Sarah touched the garment bag gently. Inside was a new dress uniform, with insignia reflecting her latest promotion to Commissioner of Innovation and Technology, a position created specifically for her by the mayor after the success of her public-private partnership initiatives. Sometimes I can't believe it either, Sarah admitted. A year ago, I was just hoping to make Chief of Special Operations. Now you're about to announce the nation's first comprehensive technology and law enforcement integration program, with Sterling Tech as the flagship corporate partner. Elena's smile turned mischievous. And that's not the only partnership you're celebrating, is it? Sarah's hand went unconsciously to the elegant pendant around her neck, a gift from Marcus. On their 6-month anniversary. The past year had been a journey of rediscovery for both of them, taking things slowly, building trust and creating something new from the foundation of their shared past. Marcus wants to make the announcement today after the press conference, Sarah said, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her voice. Are you sure the timing is right? Sarah Mitchell, if you're asking me whether announcing your engagement at the launch of a program you two built together is appropriate timing, I'm going to have to question your detective skills. Elena crossed the room and hugged her cousin tightly. This is perfect timing. It's like everything has come full circle. The thought sparked a memory, and Sarah moved to her desk drawer. From inside, she pulled out a worn photograph, the same one she'd carried for 15 years. But now, instead of representing loss and regret, it reminded her of how far they'd come. You know what's funny? Sarah said, showing Elena the photo. We're having the press conference in the same auditorium where this graduation picture was taken. Marcus didn't even realize it when he suggested the venue. Or maybe he did, Elena suggested. He's always been sentimental that way. Speaking of which, she pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a text message from Marcus. Is she nervous? About the press conference or the announcement? Both. Tell her I love her. Sarah laughed, the sound full and free in a way it hadn't been for years. Tell him to focus on his own speech, and now tell him I love him too. As Eleanor typed the response, Sarah began changing into her new uniform. Each medal and insignia represented a step in her journey, from the rookie cop who'd pulled over a fee, familiar face on Rodeo Drive, to the woman who'd revolutionized law enforcement technology integration. Richard called this morning? Eleanor mentioned casually, helping Sarah adjust her collar. He wanted to know if he could attend the press conference. Sarah paused, considering. Over the past year, Richard Sterling had worked hard to make amends. He'd stepped back from Sterling Tech as promised, but he'd also become one of the strongest supporters of the new partnership program, using his connections to help implement it in other cities. What did Marcus say? He said it was up to you, but he also said that his father's latest donation to the Police Academy Scholarship Fund helped 20 students start their training this semester. Sarah smiled, remembering her own scholarship, the one that had once seemed like a cage, but had ultimately helped her become who she was meant to be. Tell Richard he's welcome. Some bridges need to be maintained, not just built. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Very philosophical, Commissioner Mitchell. Now, are you ready to practice your speech one more time? Sarah took a final look in the mirror, seeing not just her reflection, but the echoes of every version of herself that had led to this moment. The ambitious teenager, the determined rookie cop, the guarded lieutenant, and now, finally, the woman who had found a way to combine all of her strengths into something greater. Actually, she said, surprising herself, I think I'm ready to just speak from the heart. The auditorium of Berkeley Preparatory Academy hummed with anticipation as Sarah took the stage. Cameras flashed, capturing the historic moment as she stood at the podium, Marcus seated behind her along with the mayor and other dignitaries. In the audience, she spotted Richard Sterling sitting quietly near the back, and Elena in the front row, giving her a subtle thumbs up. 15 years ago, I stood on this very stage as a graduating senior, Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. I thought I knew exactly where my life was headed, but life, as we all know, has a way of taking unexpected turns. She could feel Marcus's presence behind her, supportive and steady, as she continued. Today, we're announcing more than just a new program or a partnership between law enforcement and the tech industry. We're announcing a new way of thinking about progress, one that recognizes that the best innovations come from bringing different perspectives together. The presentation that followed was a testament to how far they'd all come. Sarah and Marcus took turns explaining the initiative, their natural chemistry evident in the way they handled questions from the press. The program would create a nationwide network of law enforcement technology centers, with Sterling Tech providing both funding and expertise to help police departments modernize their approaches to public safety. As the formal presentation concluded, Sarah felt Marcus step closer to the podium. This wasn't part of the official program, but they'd planned it carefully. Well, mostly Marcus had planned it. Sarah had agreed to let him take the lead on this particular announcement. "Before we wrap up," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, "I have one more announcement to make. It's somewhat personal, but given that it connects directly to the spirit of partnership we're celebrating today, I hope you'll indulge me." He turned to Sarah, taking her hand. 15 years ago, in this very room, I watched the most remarkable person I've ever known graduate beside me. We had dreams then, some that came true in ways we never expected, others that took a longer path than we planned. But standing here today, I'm reminded that the best dreams are the ones we dare to revise and rebuild. A murmur went through the crowd as Marcus reached into his pocket and drew out a small box. Sarah felt tears threatening despite her professional composure as he continued. "Commissioner Sarah Mitchell has taught me that true strength lies not in controlling everything, but in being willing to build bridges instead of walls. She's shown me that second chances are possible, that love can survive any challenge if it's based on mutual respect and understanding." He opened the box, revealing a stunning engagement ring. "Sarah, will you help me build one more bridge between our past and our future?" The cameras flashed frantically as Sarah took the microphone, her smile radiant. "On one condition," she said, causing Marcus to raise an eyebrow in amusement. "Promise me we'll never stop building bridges together." "I promise," Marcus replied, slipping the ring onto her finger as the audience erupted in applause. Later, at the reception, Eleanor found them sharing a quiet moment in the old-school library, their favorite spot from their teenage years. "So," she said, grinning, "does this mean I'm officially promoted from conspiracy matchmaker to maid of honor?" Sarah hugged her cousin tightly. "As if there was ever any doubt, none of this would have happened without you." "Actually," a voice said from the doorway, "I think it would have happened anyway." Richard Sterling entered, looking humbled but happy. Some things are just meant to be, even if some of us take too long to realize it. Marcus wrapped an arm around Sarah's waist as his father approached. "Dad, I'm glad you came." "I wouldn't have missed it," Richard replied, "and I brought something for you both." He handed them an envelope. Inside was a deed to a house, their old family vacation home in Napa Valley. "I thought, well, it's a perfect venue for a wedding. If you want it." Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing the surprise and emotion in his eyes. The house held many memories for him: summer vacations, family gatherings, the simpler times before ambition and social expectations had complicated everything. "It's perfect," Sarah said softly, squeezing Marcus's hand. "A bridge between past and future, just like us." As the reception continued around them, Sarah found herself drawn to the library window, looking out at the same view she'd gazed at as a teenager. But now, instead of seeing an uncertain future, she saw infinite possibilities. Marcus joined her, their reflections overlapping in the glass. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "About how life never quite goes as planned," she replied, leaning back against him, stunned. "But sometimes it goes exactly where it needs to." "Speaking of plans," Marcus said, his voice playful, "Elena mentioned something about you wanting to start a youth mentorship program combining tech education and law enforcement experience." Sarah turned in his arms, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Actually, I was thinking we could expand the scholarship foundation to include a summer internship program, Give kids from all backgrounds a chance to see both sides of the bridge we're building. Always thinking ahead, Marcus smiled, touching his forehead to hers. That's one of the things I love about you. Well, Sarah replied, her voice soft but sure, we have a lot of lost time to make up for, and I plan to make every moment count. Outside the library window, the San Francisco fog was rolling in, wrapping the city in its familiar embrace. But this time, it didn't feel like a barrier between worlds or a veil hiding secrets. Instead, it felt like a blank canvas, ready for them to paint their future together, one bridge at a time.